OMG, I've been freaking out. Can you just tell me what's going on?
Amy, have a seat. I just want to bring in a few of my colleagues.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
They are just here to support you while you get the news.
Hi, I'm Dr. Chambers, a licensed trauma therapist.
And I'm Rain with a Y, your impact support coach.
My what?
You are so supported and loved.
What's this?
It's an emotional support animal.
Studies show they really help.
Help with what?
Amy, your test came back. You do have breast cancer, and we're all here to support
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Studies show your reactions are totally normal.
You are so supported and
We
loved.
caught it fairly early. We're very optimistic you'll beat it. Here's some pamphlets, a glossary of treatment terminology, and a website with support group options.
We are holding space for you.
You are so supported and loved.
Thanks. Okay. Thank you.
We'll be here every step of the way, Amy. Any questions you may
Hey there,
have?
girlfriend. I'm Ursula, your marathon coach.
You run a marathon?
Even if I have to carry you across the finish line myself.
You are so supported and loved.
Let me just... We're gonna beat this thing. You're so brave. I'll tag all your friends in this and let them know you're requesting privacy at this time.
I can't believe I have cancer.
Denial is very normal right now.
I have more pamphlets.
Now we've got to get your theme song together.
My theme song?
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Hello?
Miss Jackson, it's Dr. Milton. You've got cancer.
Wait,
Have a great day.
Hello?
What the f?
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Reverend Tammy Denise. I'm a 17-year breast cancer survivor, and I'm the co-founder of Carrie's Touch. The piece you just watched was inspired by my personal story. Welcome to our next iteration of Intimate Conversations, Skeletons in Our Closets. Today, we are here to unpack the disease around osteoporosis and how it connects to those of us who may have had a breast cancer diagnosis. But first, I'd like to thank all of those who helped make this day possible. A special thanks to our Director of Policy, Mr. Atiba Madyoun, to our dynamic team who helps put all of this together, to all of our phenomenal guests who will be joining us today, and to our sponsor, Amgen, for allowing this opportunity for us to humanize policy and humanize the experiences of those who are considered the least, the lost, and maybe even the left out. We are here today to join you for a very short while to just sit back and relax. You know, this is a conversation. It's an intimate conversation. So we're going to respond as if we're at home and we have our favorite beverage. Mine today is water, and my cup says, "You are worthy of every good thing." And I send that message to you too. You are worthy of every good thing, and you are worthy of having strong, healthy bones, and you are worthy of having a beautiful quality of life. Breast cancer patients have a high probability of getting osteoporosis because of some of the cancer treatments that we undergo to save our lives. These treatments are necessary, but as with any type of medication, there are side effects, and osteoporosis is one of them. I was diagnosed with osteopenia. Our next guest will tell you a little bit more about what that is and how it correlates to osteoporosis, but in just watered down terms, it's pre-osteoporosis. So this is all as a result of the treatment that I went through with breast cancer. So while we're here talking about osteoporosis, we're also here talking about policy. We want to know how we can get involved, get engaged, and help make some necessary changes so that we can all live better lives. So without any further ado, I would like to take a moment and introduce my first guest who will be joining us, Miss Claire Gill. Claire Gill joined the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation formerly the National Osteoporosis Foundation, in January of 2013. After a 20-year career in public relations and marketing for national nonprofit organizations and public relations firms. During her tenure at Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation, she has served in various roles, including Chief Marketing Officer, Chief Mission Officer, and Interim CEO prior to assuming the full-time CEO role in May of 2020. What I can say is Claire is a wealth of knowledge, and she is passionate about making sure that you and I and all of our loved ones have strong, healthy bones for as long as possible. Without any further ado, Miss Claire Gill.
Hi, Reverend Tammy. So nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so very much for being here. You know, we're going to open it up, and really the floor is yours. This is your opportunity to talk to us about all things bone health. And I know you've got some special legislation that we're working on as well. And you can just, bring that in, and I'll ask you a few questions. But for the most part, just talk to our people.
All right, great. Well, I'm very pleased that you've all tuned in for this very special, intimate conversation about bone health. And it really is very important, as Reverend Tammy said, that we pay attention to our bone health, whether we have pre-existing conditions like breast cancer or diabetes or multiple sclerosis or other things that can lead to bone loss later in life. We really have to start taking care of our bones from a very young age. And as Reverend Tammy said, though she mentioned osteopenia and osteoporosis, those are kind of big, confusing words. So first I want to just talk about what our bone is. The bone is actually living tissue, which we may not know, but that is what our skeletons are. And so throughout our life, our bone is remodeling. It's building up and breaking down and building up and breaking down. And that process is really reliant on a healthy diet and exercise, the same things that we require to have a healthy overall life. So what we found, though, is as we go through different life stages, the dynamic of that building up of bone and breaking down of bone changes. So, for example, when women reach menopause, the loss of estrogen actually depletes our bone density. And that's why many people consider osteoporosis to be more of a woman's disease, because it impacts women at a greater rate due to the loss of estrogen. But it absolutely impacts men as well. It just happens a little bit later for them. And then what we're here to talk about today is, unfortunately, some of the life-saving treatments that are available for breast cancer patients actually also have a depletion effect on our bone density. So not to worry. The unfortunate part of osteoporosis is that it is a chronic disease, which means that you will have to manage it for the remainder of your life. But the good news is it is absolutely manageable. And so it's really important that we help women and men understand what's happening with their bone density and then what to do about it. So as Reverend Tammy had referenced, one of the things that we do want to talk about a little bit today is how do you advocate for yourselves primarily when it comes to bone health? And then how can you join the greater movement with the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation in ensuring that everyone has access to the necessary diagnostic and treatments available for bone health? So let's start with advocating for you. The most important thing is to really have a conversation with your clinician about where you are in your bone density space. Are you at high risk for fractures? Are you at low risk for fractures? In other words, where does bone health need to be as a priority in whatever you are currently dealing with? So obviously this will depend a lot on where you are in your treatment cycle for breast cancer or for other chronic diseases that I mentioned. Those obviously need to be taken care of right away, and those should be addressed. But you can start early asking your clinicians, how will this treatment impact my bone health? And are there things I can do, diet, exercise, that will help me preserve my bone density during my treatment? So it's not a curable disease, unfortunately, but as I mentioned, diet and exercise really do play a huge role in protecting our bones and keeping our bones healthy for as long as we can. Calcium and vitamin D are the two main nutrients that build our bone, and they work in tandem. So you need to make sure you're getting enough calcium and vitamin D in your diet. If you aren't, then you should talk to your doctor about supplementation. But we do recommend that you start by getting it from your food first and then only supplementing for any shortfall in your diet. So that's how you can advocate for yourself. Have that conversation with your clinician, get a bone density test to see a baseline. As Reverend Tammy said, she found out she has osteopenia, and she's absolutely right. That is the precursor to osteoporosis. Sort of like a little, yellow light coming up on your car dashboard saying, warning, you need to pay attention. This is important. That's what osteopenia is. It's saying you're starting to lose bone density and you really need to start paying attention to it. For those of us who are in the red and actually have osteoporosis, again, the point of seeking out treatment and assistance, if treatment is warranted, is to avoid fractures. Fractures can come in all different types. Your wrist, your arm, shoulder, your hip, which is the most debilitating for people, but your leg, your ankle, etc. The only areas that we say are not osteoporotic fractures are your fingers, your toes, and your head. So other than that, if you fall and break one of those other bones in your body, you do need to talk with your doctor about whether or not osteoporosis might be the underlying cause. On the national level, at the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation, we've established the National Bone Health Policy Institute. We wanted to get together with organizations around the country who treat women and are concerned with women and men as they age, and make sure that we're spreading the word and advocating about good bone health at every stage of life, but certainly for those who have osteoporosis already. At the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation, we work with organizations to try to get members of Congress to support legislation that provides access and reimbursement to bone density tests. That is how you're diagnosed with osteoporosis. You can also be diagnosed just from a person who has fallen and fractured and has other risk factors. Then your clinician might be able to diagnose without a bone density test, but mostly you will be sent for a bone density test. It's non-invasive. It's probably the easiest test we ever go through as women as we age. You just lie down on a table and the DEXA machine goes across you and scans your bones and gives a report for your doctor and radiologist to review. There's very little radiation with it. So again, it's really a very simple test. And it's the gold standard in determining what someone's bone density is and where they are on the spectrum of bone health. So the legislation, as I mentioned, that we're working on is that the reimbursement rate for these very simple tests has gone down so dramatically over the last 20 years that many clinicians have stopped doing the exams. They just can't afford to keep that DEXA machine in their office or hospital. So we really are working towards getting a more reasonable reimbursement rate for that. And the other thing that we're looking to do is set up a care pathway for post-fracture patients, the way that there is for cardiac patients, diabetes patients, and many other disease states. You would never leave the hospital after a heart attack without being referred to a cardiologist, put on a beta blocker, at least given aspirin, and told that you need to follow up. Yet across the United States, every single day, people fracture, get the fracture fixed at the emergency room, and are never told that they are at high risk for osteoporosis. So those are one of the two main campaigns that we're working on currently. And I've provided Carrie's Touch with information and links directly to the information you can find out about how to get involved. So I'm going to stop there and see if there's questions from Reverend Tammy or from you.
Wow, thank you so much, Claire. I mean, you and I have been talking for about 2 years now, and I learn more and more every time I hear you talk. And it's so great to have you to set the stage for this conversation. You know, when we met a few years ago, I asked you, I said, Claire, how do we make bone health sexy? Right? Because you said something that was so profound that just has remained in my head. You said that osteoporosis is a pediatric disease that manifests with age, and that we reach our maximum bone density by the age of by the age of 22. Yeah. But here's the most startling part about that we don't all automatically reach maximum bone density. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it is, again, because it manifests as we age, we think about people in the Medicare population who are susceptible to bone loss or to falls and fractures. And that's really where it
Right,
centers. But as you said, all of the bone building happens when we're young. So
right.
the exercise that we get, the calcium and vitamin D that we get as young children, helps us reach what we call peak bone mass. That's the strongest and densest bone that your body is capable of. And so that's a little bit different too, right? I obviously I'm a kind of a big bone girl, you can tell. So my bone density might be much different from someone with a smaller frame or who's thinner. But again, we have to make sure that within our own frames, we're building to that peak bone mass. And the rest of our lives, that remodeling process that I referenced, the breaking down of old bone, the building of new bone happens. So if we are not keeping up on healthy habits with diet and exercise, then our body is not remodeling our bone the way it should be. And again, we can then potentially have issues later in life. But other things, Reverend Tammy, for young people impact. So those who might have eating disorders, those who have gastrointestinal issues, all of those things which have nothing to do with being older can impact your bone health and cause problems while you're young, but also when you're older, when it truly comes to manifest. So it is something that we need to pay attention to. And then as we're talking about today, breast cancer survivors come in all ages, all shapes and sizes, of every ethnicity. And it's really important that they're aware that their bone will be impacted by their treatment. How it's impacted depends entirely on the individual. So you hopefully will stay at osteopenia. You hopefully will just remain there and just know you have to be a little bit extra cautious. Make sure you don't fall. Keep track of what's happening with your bone health and make sure it doesn't start to decline to the point where you might need treatment.
Yeah.
Other people might fracture right away and they might need treatment right away.
Yeah. Wow, Claire, this is such a rich conversation and it is so personal. I've actually recently started with a personal trainer. And one of our goals is to make sure that I, at minimum, maintained my bone mass where it is now. But he even said that, with the proper exercise and strengthening my bones, I can actually get some of it back, even though I can't reverse, having osteopenia. I can live with less pain and have more stability in my body. Thank you so much, Claire. Please hang around. I've got tons of questions for you later on for the discussion portion with our audience, but thank you for helping setting the stage for us this morning and afternoon. Okay. So now let's dive into this conversation. Claire talked about many things, from talking to your doctor and becoming your own advocate, to engaging in policy, to tips on what we can do to increase our ability to have stronger bones, especially for those who are younger and who aren't elderly, like people tend to call this an old white woman's disease. Well, I'm a young Black woman. So, this impacts all of us. So joining me today are two panelists that will help us to expand this conversation just a little bit further. First, we have Dr. Sophia Debin. She is a Miami native and a first-generation American-born of Cuban parents. She studied at George Washington University for medical school with the U.S. Navy Health Profession Scholarship Program, after which she served 7 years with the Navy and obtained fellowship training through the University of New England in orthopedic foot and ankle surgery. In 2014, Dr. Debin returned to Miami to serve her community and now has offices in Doral and in North Miami. She sees patients with multiple conditions of all ages, to include ankle arthritis, ankle sprains, foot arthritis, flat foot, Achilles tendon tears, ankle ligament injuries, and more. Dr. Debin works with world-class athletes, students, homemakers, executives, and any and everyone who spends their day on their feet. Such a rich part of this conversation. Next, we have breast cancer survivor, 3-year breast cancer survivor, Tresla Gilbreth. Tresla is the CEO of Multifacet Inc. Management Group, and Tresla is an amazing person in that she's very humble, and she said, you can just say that I am. Oh Lord, I lost it. Hold on. My bad, y'all. I'm an educator, I'm a business owner, and I'm a lifelong learner. But I can also say that she is a strong advocate in the community, very involved in policy, was part of a conversation last night with those who are running for office in this midterm election. So Tresla comes to us as a breast cancer survivor, as a patient, as an advocate, and as a lifelong learner. Ladies, please join me. All right. Well, welcome to this conversation. And I think I will start by just asking each of you. I read a little bit of your bios, but bios can get long and overbearing, and we lose really who you are. We talk about your accomplishments, but who you are and what you're passionate about. So let's start with you, Dr. Debin. You and I have had conversation about osteoporosis and some of the challenges that you face as a doctor, and working with patients trying to make sure that their bones are healthy. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you so much, Reverend Tammy. Thank you so much for having me here with this really special community. Pretty much as a woman doctor, I take care of a lot of women going through the different phases of their life. And I also take care of that group of the over 65 that does have osteoporosis. I probably fix 1 to 2 hip fractures every week, every other week. So I have to really educate my patients, unfortunately, on a one-to-one on the importance of what you and Claire were just discussing. Osteoporosis isn't just about calcium, it's about stressing your bones. As Claire mentioned earlier, our bones are a repository for calcium. Every cell in your body uses calcium, but there's also a structure to your bone, very much like a bridge. And so what you're doing now to start lifting weights is absolutely the best intervention that one could do. Another point I think that's also valuable is lactose intolerance. We're all learning a little bit more about food sensitivities. An interesting fact is that the Black community is about 75% lactose intolerant. And if you happen to be one of those folks, it's a very uncomfortable experience. And so studies looking at osteoporosis, especially during those years of peak bone mass, that 18 to 30-year-old category, it's found that in the Black community, only 50% of the calcium recommended, that 1,000 milligrams of calcium a day, are being ingested. And so what you were saying earlier, which is optimizing your vitamin intake, is going to have a huge impact now and later.
Oh, wow. Wow. Thank you. Beautiful. This is going to be a rich conversation. Wow. Tresla, hi there. Thank you so much for joining us today. Wow. So you are recently diagnosed with osteoporosis. Tell us a little bit about your breast cancer journey, and now that you're here with this diagnosis.
Well, good morning, and thank you so very much for having me. Reverend Tammy, you are an amazing jewel and a very fundamental part of my journey as well. So thank you for having me. This is so new, literally, just to bring full circle, a very long 3-year journey, diagnosed with ductal carcinoma in situ on my right breast, had a right breast mastectomy, underarm lymph node removal, 18 weeks of chemotherapy, 5 weeks of radiation every day. After that, there was a 6-month gap. And in that 6-month gap, I had a liver surgery. And after the liver surgery, I had the reconstruction, which was the deep flap, where I was cut from hip to hip with pretty much of a 12-week recovery time frame. In that time frame, after all of that took place, I went to the doctor and they said, "You did all of that, but there are more that we want you to do. And that was a medication to take daily. And I was very reluctant to do that. However, just the conversation alone, they needed to get a bone density test because my question to them was, what were the side effects that this daily medication would have on my body? And so they were very evasive, but oh, it could affect your bones. I said, with all that I've went through, I don't need anything to affect anything else in my body. So I want you to tell me how it will affect it. And so they advised that it could break down your bones. And so I said, well, what test can I take to see where my bones are now? And that was when they gave me the bone density test. And lo and behold, as soon as we got the test back, osteoporosis. And so I said to the doctor, if I now have what you are hoping I wouldn't have and what this pill would eventually cause, why then would I take this pill? And so that's where we are right now.
Oh, whew. I'm just going to breathe with you and breathe for you for a second because that's a lot. And we're just talking about a very short time span that you have had to make major life altering and life saving decisions that come with huge side effects, and so I applaud you that you have always asked the questions. You've never been afraid to ask the questions, but I'm a little bit annoyed that you had to ask for the DEXA scan. Your doctors that you're asking about side effects and the doctors never said to you that, we should get a DEXA scan since this is a possibility that you could get osteoporosis?
They did after the question, after my questions, but it wasn't just automatically. It wasn't, we're going to give you this test to see where your bones are before. The pill was just so pushed. But because I had been I've been very, no, I'm not going to take the pill. Both my oncologists at UC Davis, both my oncologists at UCSF, they both are saying the same thing, but I'm very reluctant. So I just said no pretty much, but they kept on, no, you need to. And I was like, well, why do they keep on saying that? Like, why, as a doctor, why is it so pressed? And so I have my own ideas of why it's so pressed, but I wanted to know, like, why are they pressing this? They were pressing the chemo. I did the chemo. They were pressing the radiation. I did the radiation. Then why are they keep pressing so many things? At some point it has to stop. And that's what I was like, this is the stop, but they continue to press on. And so I really wanted to know why. And I don't know. I don't know always, is it in the best interest of me or is it in the best interest of them? And so that's where I am now.
Yeah. And thank you for your transparency. I mean, and because it's a tough decision. And I'm sure other patients have had similar feelings and questions. And Dr. Devin, you work with a very large Black population. Do I understand that correctly? Talk to us a little bit about your experiences in having patients like Tresla who are reluctant to treatments that doctors are referring for them.
Great question, Reverend. First of all, Tresla, thank you so much for sharing your experience. I think that unfortunately it's very common that you're sort of put through an assembly line of treatments when you have a particular diagnosis, and yet as a whole person that you are with a whole life ahead of you, you want to know what the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years are going to look like. I'm not a cancer specialist specifically, but if I were to just sort of generalize about this particular situation is that having cancer is something that I think everyone would agree that we would like to get rid of. And so unfortunately, I think sometimes physicians develop a tunnel vision and they just focus on the cancer, which is not very representative of who all of you is. And then I would imagine that after successfully completing all of your treatments, the idea of preventing recurrence is also a concern for them and for you as well. Different patients have different risks of recurrence based on the type of cancer that they have and the stage. I don't quite know if you already had metastatic disease. You may have from your mentioning of the lymph node and the liver surgery. And so once you present with metastatic disease, that becomes a higher concern. So I would imagine that that may be some of the impetus behind it. But unfortunately, you've had to do your own research and advocate for yourself, which is really not the ideal way to deliver healthcare and for you to receive. And so I just want to apologize that that was your experience.
Thank you. I have a wonderful team, and I do have some wonderful doctors. Just when you're going through the process alone, we are our own individuals, so we can say, no, we don't want this, or no, we don't want that. But ideally, you want to survive. You want to be around. So even though I say, no, I'm not going to do this, I wind up doing it anyway. So that's been my journey. I was against chemotherapy. I absolutely am not going to do it. But then how fair was that to the rest of my family? So I said, okay, I'll do it. Then, nope, we need you to do this. So it's kind of like, okay, I've already done all of these things. What more do you want me to do? And then coming to realization that even if I take this pill, it will increase what I'm already experiencing from all of the other treatments. So
Yeah, so thank you again, Tresla. And Dr. Devin, I do want to apologize. My question was in no way to put you in an awkward spot. I understand that you are not her physician and you cannot treat her, especially across the country. I apologize for miswording that question if that's how you interpret it. I just wanted to know from you with patients that you serve directly.
So probably sorry if I misunderstood your question. My breast cancer patients have had to really accept that this is a lifelong diagnosis, and there are pitfalls and holes in the road throughout their life. They're exceedingly careful now for everything that they eat, the preservatives that are in their food, every kind of medication they take, whether it happens to be the blood pressure medicine or the anti-inflammatory that I may prescribe for knee pain. And there's always, in the patients that I treat, a significant fear that this is somehow one way or another related to their cancer. I think many of us have been lucky to have experience with diseases that are self-limited. You sprain your ankle and it's over, you break your bone, you get a cast or a surgery and that's over too. And from what I'm hearing from you, Tresla, and from what I see in my patients is that the experience of breast cancer and all of the treatments that you have has had such an effect on your body and also on your spirit and on your mind that it's kind of always there. And it's not something that I would wish on anyone to feel like there's a specter that's common, and I know Reverend Tammy could probably speak to this as well, is that living with this is really not just living through the chemo or the radiation or all of the reconstructive surgeries or all of it. It's continuing to be mindful of the effect this has had on your body, and you've had a real experience with that.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so very much.
And thank you, Dr. Devin, and thank you, Tresla. So when we turn to Tresla, you said something that I think is very poignant, that you are questioning and challenging the doctors on the why is there this next thing. But Dr. Devin, I think you tapped in perfectly with acknowledging that this is a lifelong diagnosis and a lifelong process. I'm 17 years out and there are still elements of it. But if I can encourage those of you who are watching, and especially to you, Tresla, for being here today, I'm 17. I'll take a little bit of osteopenia to live, 17 years. I didn't know that when I was at 3 years. I was like you. I was very inquisitive about what's the next step? What's the next step? And one of the best gifts a therapist gave me was she said, the next step is the next moment. If you try to take your whole life to know what's next, she said, none of us knows that. So our goal is to take what we have in this moment and try to figure out how we can have the highest well-being in navigating the space from moment to moment to moment. So Tresla, I have been with you the entire time throughout your diagnosis, and I will still be here with you. And I know this is raw. This is new. This is not something you've even had an opportunity to process yet. So, I super applaud you for saying yes to having this very raw, very real, and very necessary conversation.
Absolutely. Again, I am always honored just for you to provide this platform, because who but you would do it? I don't see anyone else doing it. So I applaud you, and I applaud Carrie's Touch, because quite frankly, when you get these diagnoses, there's not a lot of resources outside of your doctors.
Yeah. And speaking of that, thank you, Tressa. Dr. Debin, talk to us from a physician's perspective about the DEXA scan. I know, okay, I was in a clinical trial. I got a DEXA scan, 17 years ago. But until I start working in bone health, I wasn't aware of when I was supposed to get that follow-up DEXA scan. So it was 15 years between my first DEXA scan and my second DEXA scan, which revealed the osteopenia. So talk to us about testing and getting patients tested with DEXA scans.
It's a great question, and I'll tell you that there aren't really wonderful, clear guidelines. So it really takes you and hopefully your practitioner to sort of be aggressive about this issue. Ideally, any woman over 65 should get a baseline DEXA scan, or if you're over 50 and have had a fracture related to low bone density. One of the things that's very unique about breast cancer is the specific types of chemotherapeutic agents that are absolutely required to treat your cancer. Specifically, number one, shut down your ovaries, so less estrogen, which means your bone mineral density is going to go down from that, and also the drugs themselves have an effect. So there's a predictable loss of bone density just from having chemotherapy. So I would advise anyone that is in that phase of either about to start chemo or has recently started to get a baseline, and then having known that you've had chemo probably somewhere at about 1 year, get a second study. If you are diagnosed with either osteopenia or osteoporosis, then the DEXA gets repeated usually every 2 years once treatment has been initiated, whether it's vitamins, bisphosphonates, exercise, or some combination.
Wow, that's really good to know. That's really good to know that even we were supposed to take a bone density prior to chemotherapy.
I just to clarify, Tressa, I don't know that that's a national guideline. I would just say, as an orthopedic surgeon, knowing what chemotherapeutic drugs do to our skeleton, I think that it's a very reasonable thing. And some centers actually will administer the treatment for osteoporosis, which is a bisphosphonate, that's the medicine, via an IV around the time of initiating their first chemotherapeutic treatment in order to prevent some of the loss of bone mass. Also, since I'm on the topic, they will also administer these medicines for patients that have metastatic disease so that it doesn't go to the bone. So if you happen to have liver or lung disease, you'll sometimes be prescribed this medication so that it doesn't also go to your bones in the years after.
Wow,
Yeah.
very good to know.
Yeah, it's good to know. And it's also frustrating because, you said something, Dr. Devin, you said that, these are not the guideline. This is not a national guideline, but why isn't it? It's a rhetorical question, but why isn't it a national guideline when we are looking at people going through treatment, for life-saving treatments? They don't have a choice. We want to say no to chemotherapy, but Tresla, you said it best. Well, I want to live. Yeah, you want to live for your family, but you want to live for you.
True.
Right?
And you don't even realize that until after, because the effects of your body take place after all of the treatments.
Right. So something I want to bring up really quickly. I think we have a few more minutes left. Something I want to bring up really quickly. Dr. Devin, you said that the guidelines do show for people age 65 and up to get their bone density scans. And then for folks ages 50 who've had some type of chronic illness that may impact their bones. Tresla, how old are you?
I just turned 45.
Exactly. You turned 45. Now, and even with the guidelines that these aren't your guidelines. So don't nobody come for me thinking I'm coming after Dr. Devin. These are not her guidelines that she is sharing with us. But what I want to bring out is osteoporosis is always shown up as an old person's disease. Right. But back when I was talking to Claire, we talked about the fact that, you start preparing your bones from the time you are able to walk so that you can reach optimal bone density, bone mass density, right? By the age of 22. And for those that don't do that in those formative years, they get to be 25 and then they have a long road ahead of them with very fragile bones. The other thing I want to bring up, I do have a question. The other thing I want to bring up is that we do know that statistically, white women are diagnosed with this disease more than Black women, but Black women actually suffer and die more from this disease. Can you speak to that, Dr. Devin, with what you've seen with your patients?
Yes, it's a great question. Nationally, about 9% of white women have osteoporosis, which is the increased risk of having a fracture, and about 40%, 45% have osteopenia. In the Black community, 4% of Black women have osteoporosis, and about 25 to 30% have osteopenia. So in some ways, it is a little bit less common in the Black community. However, when a Black man or Black woman sustains an osteoporotic related fracture, they have a spine fracture, they have a hip fracture, they break their wrist, they do much worse after having had that experience. They have more pain, they have more complications from surgery, and they're also less likely to be treated for osteoporosis.
Wow. So, in our final minutes, I'm going to give, each of you about 60 seconds to wrap up this conversation. And here's the question to both of you. What policy needs to happen to change the course of how we are approaching our bone health and how we are having access to DEXA scanning? Tresla?
Okay, I would just say 100%. If it has to do with policy, let it be accessible to all. If it is in the communities or if it is at UCSF or Stanford, it's still those same things. The machines need to be in the areas where our communities are, where they may not have such access.
Thank you. Dr. Devin.
Tresla, I 100% agree, especially what Claire said, that the reimbursement has gone down so that there are fewer DEXA machines available to make that more accessible and increase the knowledge of patients and doctors about this problem. The other thing I'd like to speak to, though, is nutrition. There's a very significant childhood hunger issue here in the United States, and the school lunch program is one of the few ways in which we have to address that. And Reverend Tammy, you mentioned it exactly correctly. What children and young people eat has everything to do with their lifelong bone density, and so supporting feeding kids healthy foods is also an important policy focus.
Wow, you two have been very, very informative, very engaging, and very raw and very real, and I appreciate every ounce of it. Please, please, please hang around for the discussion part at the end of this conversation, because I've got tons more questions ready to ask you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
I hope you are getting some good information, and I hope you are seeing that the skeletons in your closet, which we're calling your body, are very, very in need of your attention and, more importantly, your action. Tresla said to make the DEXA scanning accessible to all people. Well, we've got some legislation for our call to action that we want you to become involved in at the end of this conversation. Our next guest is Mr. Charles Belk. Charles Belk is the founder and executive director of Fitting the Description. He is also a producer and president of I Will Make You a Star Productions, a Los Angeles-based social media, digital marketing and production company. He became the face of an international media coverage surrounding his August 2014 wrongful arrest by a local law enforcement agency, where he was mistakenly identified for fitting the description of the wrong, tall, bald Black man. Charles Belk has been able to turn the time he spent handcuffed on the curb into becoming mad, making a difference, spearheading a national effort to institute new local and statewide law enforcement process improvements, and advocating for legislative changes on both the state and federal levels. He has successfully enlisted 21 state legislators to introduce his auto erase legislation, aka the Belk Bill, in their respective states. The bill has been signed into law by the governors of North Carolina, Illinois, Colorado, Rhode Island, Kansas, and Missouri. Whew, this is gonna be good. Without any further ado, Mr. Charles Belk, welcome.
As your body grows bigger,
your mind must flower.
It's great to learn,
'cause knowledge is power.
It's Schoolhouse Rocket, a chip off the block of your favorite schoolhouse, Schoolhouse Rock.
Woo, you sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee, but I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will, but today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." Then he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. I hope and pray that they will, but today I am still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, but it looks like I'm going to live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what happens?
Then I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all over again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well, then I'm off to the White House where I'll wait in a line with a lot of other bills for the president to sign. And if he signs me, then I'll be a law. How I hope and pray that he will. But today I am still just a bill.
You mean even if the whole Congress says you should be a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again, and by that time you're so
By
old.
that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but how I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
He signed you, Bill. Now you're a law.
Oh, yes.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. My name is Charles Belt, founder and president of Fitting and Description. That was a very appropriate video to show because when my situation happened to me, and I'll tell you a little bit about that, but when my situation happened to me, I didn't know exactly what I was going to do about it. And sure enough, I turned to that video to help me understand exactly how a law was made. And just to give you a little background, on August the 22nd, it was the third Friday in August in 2014, during the Emmy Awards weekend in Los Angeles, as well as the Friday before the Tuesday of Mike Brown's funeral in Ferguson. I was detained and wrongfully arrested because I fit the description of a tall, bald black man that had just been involved in robbing a bank. Long story short, I was held for an hour or so on the curb and then held for 6 hours at the police department. I was booked, photos were taken, and I was being held on a $100,000 bond. Eventually, once they went and watched the video and determined that I was not the person involved, they let me out at midnight, a little shortly after midnight that Friday night. The thing is, though, however, is that I found out that even though I had been let go as innocent, I still had an arrest record, that if I didn't do anything about it, I would indeed have that arrest record follow me for the rest of my life. And it would affect me being able to get jobs, certain jobs, me being able to apply for certain loans, just to do a host of things. So I didn't know what to do. I was just an average, American citizen, like most of you, had something that had happened to me, had a cause that I didn't want to go off and fight for, and I just didn't know what to do about it. And certainly enough, what I did do was found out about, hey, if you want some change in our great country, you can kind of, as an individual, get someone to introduce legislation. It could be done on a national level, of course, or it could be done state by state. For me, wrongful arrests were covered on a state by state basis because each state handles wrongful arrests differently. So what I had to do is go out and engage state elected legislators to take up my cause. And I did that in a various amounts of ways. I went to various conferences to just kind of meet the state legislators and appeal to them exactly what was going on and explain to them the situation. And surprisingly enough, when you tell a state legislator a story about being wrongfully arrested during the time that we were going through in 2014 and even the time that we're going through now, you find that there's an opportunity for them to support you. And they supported me. I kind of did the low-hanging fruit, in my opinion, which was, kind of going at the Democratic elected state legislator, because I felt they would kind of feel the black man being, wrongfully terminated at the hands of law enforcement, as was the case and as still is the case. And so that's why I went after. But surprisingly enough, it was a piece of legislation that says, hey, if you were wrongfully arrested, then you should, and you are declared innocent, you never went to jail, you never got prosecuted for that, then your arrest record should be exactly the same as it was before someone made a mistake, mistakenly identified you, and wrongfully arrested you. And so that was the piece of legislation that I embraced upon and championed through. It's been introduced in 28, 29 different states. It is now a law. Thank goodness, in 9 states, and we're still working that effort, not going to stop until we get, a significantly more amount of states engaged. But the interesting piece about this is that as a normal American, I was able to take my cause forward and get others engaged in it, and it became a law that are affecting hundreds of thousands of lives in various states across the U.S. And if there is something that you see in your community or in your state, I want to strongly encourage you to just make sure that you talk to someone about it. You talk to a state legislator about it. Start with your elected representative that represents your district. Tell them your cause, but you also might want to find state legislators in your state or national legislators that are maybe suffering from the same thing, that may have may be able to better identify with the cause that you're trying to push forward. I didn't know it was something that I could do as an individual. I had no idea where I was going to start, and true enough, I turned to that piece of that video that you just saw, and it explained everything to me. And proudly enough, I'm very happy about the results that thus far with my legislation.
First of all, people, so, most of you know that I am on the West Coast. Some of you know that people like Dr. Debin and Claire Gill are on the East Coast, but I bet none of you know that do I have it correctly that you are in Nairobi, Kenya?
I am in Nairobi, Kenya.
Wow, thank you so very much. I'm not going to even ask you, well, what are you doing there? But I know it's something amazing. Thank you for your story, first and foremost. Some of you might be saying, well, what's this dude have to do with bone health? He doesn't necessarily have anything to do with bone health directly, but what he has to do with this conversation is building a bridge between noticing a problem, addressing a problem, and then taking some action to get some legislation signed into law. He is an example of people that are like you and me, walking down the street, living our life, and then all of a sudden we find an injustice that needs to be addressed. So thank you for the work that you are doing with your Fit the Description efforts. My first question to you is, how long did it take you from watching that Schoolhouse Rock video that I also grew up on? It was hard not to sing the song along, but from the Schoolhouse Rock video to your very first piece of legislation signed into law?
Listen, I'm going to tell you, from all the stories that I've heard, it was an amazing effort. And I can't promise this to happen to everyone that goes out and try this. But for me, I was able to find several state legislators. One, my home state was North Carolina. I was actually living in California at the time, but I was at the Congressional Black Caucus in DC in September 2014. I had a chance just to talk to my state legislator, somebody who I hadn't been knowing for a while, actually. He said, I will certainly introduce this. This was in September 2014 when we had the conversation. His team drafted up legislation and got it introduced in January of 2015. It was actually signed into law by the governor of North Carolina, a Republican governor, actually. And North Carolina was a completely Republican-controlled House and Senate. And but it was signed into law on August the 6th, August the 4th, 2015. So it was less than a year from the idea to the creation of legislation to the introduction. I have seen other bills of mine that was also introduced in 2014 that still haven't been made into law. So that was, two bills were signed into law that year. Both Illinois and North Carolina signed their bills into law. So it was less than a year, but I've heard that is a very rare occasion when something like that happens.
Yes, that is a very rare occasion. I know Carrie's Touch, our first sponsorship of legislation, it took us 5 years to get it signed into law. It was around oral chemotherapy parity bill. So that is that's a blessing, is what I'll call it, and it happens that way. What would be the number one thing that you would recommend to those of us who are listening? Part of this conversation is about humanizing the policy process. And what I loved about your introduction of playing, the Schoolhouse Rock video is that it takes legislation from being this big, scary thing to something that's more tangible and accessible for people. Some people are just over politics. They don't feel like they can win. What would you say to encourage our viewers today to be that first step in getting involved in helping to pass legislation, whether it's what we're going to present or something else?
I would say that take that video for real to heart, because that is the process. Bills, it is a step by step process. So don't fear in moving forward to that next step. Don't fear if you don't even know exactly what it is you want. You have an idea of what kind of results you want to come out of it. And talk that to the legislators. They have teams that write bills. They will research what laws are in effect in the state that you're in. They will research that, then they will craft language on your behalf that accomplishes what you want to accomplish. Now, more than likely, it's going to also accomplish some things that they want to accomplish, but truth be told, it will also accomplish what you want to accomplish. And they own that process. You might have to testify. I have had video conferences testimony in front of state Senate subcommittees and committees, and I've gone in person and testify, and it's basically telling my story, telling why it is I feel this piece of law will benefit a lot of people. And what you have to do is don't be fearful at all. Don't worry that you have no idea what you're doing, because I had no idea at all what I was doing. And now 9 laws later, I actually feel like an old pro with this, because it's kind of like, I understand this process, and each state has an absolutely different process. So you just can't let it bother your mind. You can't let it can't fear you at all. You just start at point 1, and then you try to get to point 2. You might have to go through point 1, and 1.2 to get to point 2, but you just got to keep going, and it's work. But it is all worth it if your cause becomes a new law.
Wow. Charles, thank you so very much for being here with us. And thank you for all that you are doing. And thank you for this law that you are able, innocent people are now able to have their records be cleared of some, wrongful arrest because they fit the description. So
yes,
now, I'm sorry.
No, I was saying yes, indeed. And I just wanted to say, I wanted to steal 15 more seconds from you guys and say, hey, while the question was, what do I have to do with bone cancer or any of this? Surprisingly enough, after I first met Reverend Tammy a month ago, and I happened to be down in Argentina at the time, I talked to my mom. I knew my mom was being kind of monitored for some type of cancer. Turns out it was bone cancer. Turns out about 15 years ago, when I went and got a checkup, my doctor put me on a vitamin D supplement. I said, I don't need that. I just haven't been out in the sun, and I'm, taking my advice. She's like, no, you need to take this. But she didn't tell me why. She just told me, well, comes to find out, every disease that my mom gets kind of comes to me as well, like literally everything. And so now I understand much better why that doctor wanted me to get more vitamin D. And I think as a male, that there are opportunities. You guys say you start young. There are opportunities to educate, folks all across this globe with regards to bone cancer and how it becomes very hereditary.
You just blew my mind. I'm rarely speechless. And so you just blew my mind. Wow. Well, even more so, thank you. I mean, there's never a coincidence in anything, right? So we hope that we can get you and your energy involved in our push toward getting our DEXA legislation passed, that we are joining in the Coalition of Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation. So yes, those 15 seconds were very much necessary, and our love and prayers to you and your mom. And we can talk offline about, how we can support you and her. But for now, I'd like to take the opportunity to bring all of our guests today back to this conversation and to start opening up the space for us to have some question and answer section. So for those of you who are watching, if you've got some questions, pop them in the chat and we will try to get to those questions, as many of them as we can. We will start with Claire. I want to start with you in response to what Charles just said about his mom recently being diagnosed with not just osteoporosis, but actual bone cancer, and how that fits into this conversation.
Yeah, well, again, best wishes for your mom and her journey through this. There's always something in, so bone cancer obviously is very different than osteoporosis. So just if you have osteoporosis, it does not mean you have bone cancer. However, if you are a cancer patient, I think as Dr. Debin had referenced earlier, there might be some issues where they do spend special attention on you because they want to avoid having your cancer spread to your bones. So again, that's it's a little bit different, but a lot of treatments for cancer can lead to depletion of bones. And so since we're talking about Charles, the prostate cancer is another type of cancer where the treatment actually depletes bone too. So we're very conscious of the fact that we have to make sure that men are there. And I loved your comment, Charles, about needing to go on a vitamin D supplement. And that's another myth. Most people think people who look like me. I realize on this background, I almost fade in. I am so matching. If I put my hand up, you can barely see. I am first generation American, but both my parents were Irish. And so the thought of me being vitamin D deficient makes perfect sense. And it's true. People of Northern European descent do tend to have vitamin D deficiency. But that's the myth that so many people need to think about, is that, oh, well, if I'm dark skinned, I don't need to have, worry about it. It's the same thing about, skin cancer, that we think that, oh, I don't need to be worried about it. And that's not true. So vitamin D testing is something that is so easy to do, and won't get into it here, but it plays such a vital role in so many areas of disease and disease management we're finding, and as Dr. Debin had also said earlier, we're learning so much more about food sensitivities. We're also learning so much more about how nutrition impacts disease, particularly chronic diseases. So I'm really glad, Charles, that you were getting that vitamin D to protect your bones, and also then to prevent a lot of other diseases that come along with lack of vitamin D. So,
wow. Thank you. Dr. Debin, were you going to say something? You're on mute.
In my world, I take care of a lot of fractures of all kinds, and I've started doing what Claire does, which is to test people. I even tested myself. I probably get 2 to 3 hours of sunshine every week because I'm out on a bicycle, and my vitamin D level was low. I supplement every day. And I think I've probably met, of my last 100 patients that I've tested their vitamin D, maybe 5 of them had a normal vitamin D level, and everyone else of all sorts of colors, ages, shapes, sexes, it was low. We're learning a lot more about vitamin D. And then the other thing I wanted to say is there's some early information about supplementing vitamin D for breast cancer specifically, and that there are some studies showing that those patients that have vitamin D supplementation do a little bit better with breast cancer, specifically the ductal carcinoma in situ. So that's another area of research.
Wow. This conversation, we don't have enough time for this conversation to get as in depth as we'd like to, but there will be opportunities for follow-up. We just stay tuned for our next intimate conversation. But our next question for now is, where can I get a DEXA screening done?
A DEXA screening can be obtained at any hospital. You pretty much just need a prescription. Your primary care physician can provide it if you have a relationship with pretty much any other doctor. It's considered a screening. Now, depending on what type or kind of insurance you have, they may or may not approve it. If you don't happen to fit into one of those pre-approved categories that I had mentioned, or be considered high risk, and your physician has to prove that on a piece of paper, it is occasionally difficult, and the insurance companies may refuse that. So, Tresla, had you not had this experience, and as a 40 or 45-year-old woman just wanted to go check your baseline bone mineral density, they may not approve to pay for that, and that's one of the other areas of policy, Reverend Tammy, to think about.
Yeah, that was my next question. Did you want to add something, Tresla?
I was just going to say, Dr. Devin, that is excellent because not only the areas, but being able to qualify to have that test being done. And I just wanted to add, Dr. Claire or Claire Gill, in regards to the vitamin D. So now, as a daily life change, now I have to take 2,000 IUs of vitamin D daily.
That's right. It's really hard to get vitamin D from the diet. I think that's one of the things, and as Dr. Devin said, you can be outside and but you need to be completely uncovered and without sunscreen. So we all know that that's not going to happen for us.
Yeah.
So, unless you like sardines in a can and a lot of it, you're probably not going to get as much vitamin D as you need. So the supplementation is important. And as you said, Trustly, the recommendation is 800, international units for people at a normal level. But like you said, you need 2,000. And, from my thing, I take 5,000. So it really is important that that was the other thing I want to share, especially as people are listening. Don't just start taking supplements, please. Really, you need to have the conversation with your clinician and find out if you are at risk for something that needs that. But vitamin D is a simple blood test that can be done with your other blood tests. And then, as Dr. Devin said, finding someone to give you a DEXA, it shouldn't be as hard as it is at any age, but it is. And that conversation you guys were having earlier about the guidelines, and I'm sitting, I'm backstage, thing, nodding along with it. Unlike cancer, where you go to an oncologist who is the specialist in cancer, with bone, anyone can treat. So your primary care, your gynecologist, a geriatrician, a rheumatologist, an endocrinologist, all of the orthopedic surgeon, all of those specialties can and should be able to diagnose and treat for osteoporosis. Their professional societies each have guidelines, specific scientific guidelines. And unfortunately, all of those guidelines are not aligned. So that is also something that we're working with our colleagues in the medical field about.
Wow, thank you. Such a rich discussion. And since we are here today, again, to talk about policy, we're talking about the problem, we're laying that out, we're laying out some solutions to how to address it, but we know that the issue is larger than what any one of us individually can do to acknowledge it. This question is an open question for anybody to answer. From your viewpoint, what is missing in the policy discussion that can help patient access to better protect their bones and to get the best care possible as a breast or any other patient who might be in need of bone health care? Nobody want to answer?
Very briefly, and I think, Claire, you're 1,000% correct. If we were to add, there's a list online at the National Osteoporosis Foundation as who's at high risk for fracture. People who are on things like prednisone, so if you have asthma, lupus, rheumatoid, the medications that suppress your immune system. There are no chemotherapeutic agents that are on that list. It's not on there. So I think even just highlighting that in the guidelines of if you've had chemotherapy, you may be at increased risk would be a very simple place to start.
Whoa.
That's significant.
That is significant, and that's mind-blowing. Yeah. So Charles, I'm going to volley over to you really quickly to take the question that I asked and put it in the mind of a Charles Belk, who now is dealing with some bone health issues. And if we were looking at legislation to have better patient access and have equitable care, and I love how Atiba always says, he looks at inequity. Inequitable care is what we have. Yes, we're trying to move toward equitable care, but that's not what we have. In your mind, how do you take that conversation and turn it into policy? And I know that's a big question with a very short time span here, but just to get, our creative flow going, just take a stab at it.
So what I would say is that that's definitely a national issue. I'm not sure how states are different in how they would handle those situations. It definitely sounds like a national issue. It definitely sounds like something for our folks in Washington. And, you know, those, in my opinion, talking with the people in Washington, they will have family members, they will have themselves possibly to identify with such a well identified disease as, you know, kind of bone cancer and osteoporosis. And I think that that's where you want to start. I know I'm flying back into the country for the Congressional Black Caucus. And since you guys have made this specifically kind of targeting Black women, that is, you know, that is definitely the place where all of you and your coalition of folks want to be, just in people's ears to move the whole cause forward.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Thank you so very much. Claire, coming to you with the actual DEXA legislation. Why don't you talk about that for a little bit? Tell us what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, as you talked about and shared your journey with creating legislation, and Charles, very impressive what you were able to do and create in such a short amount of time, honestly. This DEXA legislation has been working its way through Congress for 10 years. I've only been at the organization for 9. And so it's really frustrating to me that this has not been addressed already. It is nonpartisan. It affects 54 million Americans. You know, it's proven. The DEXA is proven. It's not like we don't know what to do or how to diagnose people. We do. So, you know, Senator Collins in Maine is one of the co-sponsors of the actual legislation, and she's worked on it for a number of years. And, you know, she said at a Senate Aging Committee meeting that I was in attendance at, you know, it's for us. We know what to do. We know how to do it. We just need to do it. And that's where I feel like we've been for the last, you know, 9 years, 10 years with this. So we do need to get people to pay attention to it. But as you said, Reverend Tammy, at the very beginning, one of our first discussions, how do we make it sexy? How do we make it important? And unfortunately, that's what's required to get any attention on Capitol Hill. And I think what's so powerful about bringing together our coalition and having organizations like Carrie's Touch involved is that we need to work with organizations that are impacted by bone, but whose advocates and whose legislation has been more effective. So you all in the breast cancer community are warriors. And, you know, that's how I describe women and men even that I know going through those you're warriors about it. And so we need to learn from that on the bone side, and we need to engage with you. And the fact, again, that you now are impacted by bone as well, Tresla. How do we then work together and empower, you know, each other to really make this something that our legislators have to pay attention to? And so that's kind of where we are. I'm really, at my mantra this year is we are getting this DEXA legislation into an end of year package in Congress this year. It has to be done. And to do that, our immediate work is focusing on the Senate Finance Committee. And you know, we'll provide information to share with everyone in Carrie's Touch about who sits on Senate Finance Committee. And then if you're in those states where those senators are, you pick up the phone and say, I know this has come to your committee. I need you to pay attention. And with your help, I believe we really will get this done.
Wow. Thank you, Claire. That is a perfect setup for our call to action for all of you to get involved. We are partnering with the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation to get this legislation done now. It's necessary. Dr. Deb and I am just disheartened to hear that there's a national list around disease states that impact osteoporosis and bone health, and there are no therapeutic drugs on this list. You know, that's another huge part of the hurdle, but we're going to make as much noise as we possibly can to help you, Claire, and our other coalition members to get involved and get this train moving in the right direction. So my call and my charge to all of you who are watching this live, who are listening live, and for those of you who will come in on the repeat, get involved. You can find all types of information on our website at www.carriestouch.org. And you can go to the Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation. Claire, what's your website?
It's bonehealthandosteoporosis.org.
bonehealthandosteoporosis.org. And find the information and get involved. You can shoot us an email, you can shoot us a text message, you can call us and just say, how do I get involved? And we definitely will bring you along. And if we have to do like they used to do, get on buses, get on planes, but get across the nation to stand at the Capitol with you, to advocate. I'll just say this one last thing. There's a school initiative that is here in California, and they are looking to pass some legislation. There were 500 students who testified yesterday, and their initiative passed, unanimously. And that's what we want, and that's what we need. I think when we answer the question of how do we make bone health sexy, well, we show up. If you look at everybody on this call, we're all sexy. So if we get all the sexy people to show up, then we've made bone health sexy. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to hear about it. But our skeletons are really what carries our bodies. And if our skeleton isn't in shape, then our body is in danger of great, great, great pain and suffering, potentially unnecessarily. So we are asking you to get involved. Reach out to Carrie's Touch at www.carriestouch.org. I want to take this time to thank all of our guests. You have been so wonderful and so rich to this conversation and helping us to move the needle forward. I know that we have much, much work to do in the days, months, and years to come to make health better for all. Healthcare is a right. It's not a privilege. It's a right. We all deserve to have access to quality health care, and we need to be seen as human beings. So we invite you to join us. Thank you again for tuning in. I want to say one last thing in closing. I dedicate today's intimate conversation to my sister, my friend, my confidant, my business partner, and co-founder of Carrie's Touch, Lynn Marie Rankin Cochran. Today, 9 years ago, she took her last breath here on this earth, and she suffered in great, great, great pain. So I am dedicating this conversation to her life, and to her legacy. And so as we sign off, I encourage you to go hug those who mean the most to you. Tell them how much you love them. If there's any angst or ill will that's going on between you and somebody that's special to you, fix it before it's too late. Because people are suffering and people are dying every single day. And what we need is more love, more compassion, and more support. So keep fighting the good fight, and we'll see you again soon. My name is Reverend Tammy Denise, and it's been my honor to serve you today.